What's up everyone, Shirley here. Today I'm finally going to be doing the long overdue 9.0 Shadowlands Arms Warrior Guide. I could have made this a couple of weeks ago, but I wanted to see, how tuning would go and gear and the way things shook out over the beginning of the expansion, so here we are. I'm going to be covering everything I can. This is going to be mostly Venthyr focused because that's what I'm playing right now for Raid and PvP. However, I will be mentioning the other covenants, when I can, and, interjecting them where it's appropriate. But the Necrolord Covenant, I haven't seen a single Necrolord warrior, actually, that I can think of, so I'm not going to be covering them too much, but carrying a Night phase is pretty simple. So, jumping right into this today, I'm going to be covering the talents real quick, as well as the legendaries, and then going over the rotation for single targets, multi-targets, that kind of thing. And we'll also be talking about Conduits, a little bit of PvP, and I'm going to try to keep this shorter than the BFA one. But anyway, jumping right in here, the talents that we're going to be generally using for single target raiding is this Skull Splitter, Double Time, Massacre, Warbreaker, Avatar, and Ravager. The second wind row doesn't matter. This one doesn't matter. Use whatever you're comfortable with there. We're setting up this way because of this particular legendary, the Signet of Tormented Kings. That's why we're speccing into Avatar and Ravager, because they have unique synergy with single target situations. Generally, Skull Splitter is going to be better. Sudden Death might be a hair better for you. I would recommend you sim that. And Massacre is going to be the best for Venthyr, at least, because of Condemn. So, getting right in the first talent row here, Sudden Death, like I said, it might be a little bit better. Rend could be good if you're playing Kyrian or Night Fae. It's pretty decent single target, but with Venthyr, you definitely want to be Massacre. The 40 talent row does not matter in single targets. The 45 row, in for the kill, lost a ton of value because haste isn't super important these days, also why anger management fell off. My stats are not ideal right now. I've got more versatility than I would like, but generally I would say you want a pretty even spread of your own stats. So like 20% crit, 20% haste, and then verse mastery doesn't really matter afterwards. Like I said, mine aren't ideal, but you get what you get. This row, Avatar is going to be a little bit better for everybody, basically, because of this legendary. It's going to give us another activation of our proc. Deadly Calm is pretty good for Venthyr as well, on the pull, as well as during execute phase because of Condemn. However, I would recommend going Avatar. It's a little bit RNG, but you get a ton of value out of it when it works your way. The 50 row, Dreadnought is decent in AoE, but Ravager is going to be the go-to single target because it's not delaying our Condemn damage, basically, like Bladestorm would be. The AoE talent setup that I would recommend for some of the raid fights that have a lot of adds or Mythic Plus would be swapping Sudden Death and Dreadnought and just leaving everything else the same. And that's because Sudden Death is going to get a little bit more value if you have Sweeping Strikes up and can sweep one of those Condemns on 2 targets. It's going to be better than Skull Splitter, but they're both pretty close, so I would say play with what you're comfortable with here. Dreadnought is going to be better for Mythic Plus and everything instead of Ravager, because we're going to be able to set up big AoE bursts with Warbreaker, Avatar, and Bladestorm. And Dreadnought is also going to double dip with one of the Conduits that we'll get into a little bit later that also buffs the damage of this. It's the, what's it called here? Crash the Ramparts Conduit is going to buff your Dreadnought damage as well, so that's why it's going to be very good in AoE. But anyway, getting back to, PvP as well, I would run the AoE situation with Stormbolt and Defensive Stance. That's what I'm going to be speccing into 99% of the time for PvP. PvP talents are subjective, so we'll maybe look at that a little bit. But anyway, going back to a pure single target build and kind of spelling out the rotation, it's very much a priority system, like it's been for a long time now. But basically, what you're going to want to do is, the first priority is keeping up deep wounds on your target at all times, your new mastery, which is going to increase the damage that you do to that target. Mortal Strike, Warbreaker, Colossus Smash, Ravager, and Bladestorm all apply that, as well as Cleave, but generally I would favor Warbreaker for Mythic Plus and everything over Cleave for that burst setup. It's really powerful with the Signet of Tormented Kings. So You want to keep up deep wounds. Skull Splitter is probably your next priority. Anytime you're below 60 rage, and then you're going to be filling with Overpower, and Slam is your filler, and that's replaced by Condemn anytime you have Condemn up. However, that's the very basic version. In practice, it's a little bit more nuanced than that. So, for example, on the pole, when you can Condemn your target, say this is a raid boss, and you're lusting on poles, so you've got a ton of haste, and you're getting flooded with rage generation. You're going to go in, charge in, and pop Avatar and your Warbreaker, obviously, to put up your debuff and deep wounds. And I would say don't macro Avatar and Ravager together, actually, because Ravager is going to be on GCD as well as Warbreaker, and you can miss a single GCD of Recklessness if you get a Recklessness proc from Tormented Kings. It's a very minor thing, so if you want to macro them together and burn the next GCD and Warbreaker and then Condemn, it's fine. But I found that if you're using both back to back, you're gonna rage cap, especially with Lust Up on pull, and that's a 40 rage Condemn that you could have just cast, and that's also gonna synergize really well with another one of our Conduits being Ashen Juggernaut. This is also the one you're going to want to use for single target raiding, just going to increase the critical strike chance of Condemn, and I swap that out for Crash or Ramparts in any AoE situation that I'm using Dreadnought in, but Ashen Juggernaut's definitely what I would recommend for raiding. But anyway, getting back to the pull, so if you charge in on pull, pop Avatar, Warbreaker, and you get a Ravager proc, then from your ring, then I would go ahead, burn the next GCD, and drop your additional Ravager, have them both going at the same time, because they're going to be generating rage every time they hit the boss. And then it's going to be just spamming Condemn, basically, if you have Lust Up on pull, because that first 20% is going to go really fast, so you're going to want to maximize as much Condemn damage as you possibly can during that window, as well as the fact that you're probably getting flooded with rage, so I wouldn't worry about overpowering your target. Obviously, if you have low rage, and you're just sitting there waiting on a GCD, then you should be overpowering and skull splittering on pull. But as long as you're bouncing, between like 30, your rage bar is moving and you're never running out, then I would prioritize Condemn. The second situation that can happen on pull is you Avatar, Warbreaker, and you get a Recklessness proc. In which case, then you're definitely going to be spamming Condemn, because you're going to be flooded with rage because of the way Recklessness works and interacts with Bloodlust and everything. So I would spam out Condemn during that interaction, and then right at the end of the wreck wearing off on your character, then I would drop your Ravager. That's actually going to desync your cooldowns a little bit, but as the fight goes on, it's generally not that big of a deal. And when you drop your Ravager, if you get another Recklessness proc, great, because you can just continue to spam Condemn. If you get an Avatar proc, generally you're going to be running low on rage at that point, so that's where you're going to fill in with Skull Splitter and get your Overpower on cooldown, and basically cycle between Condemn and Overpower procs during that top end window. And then towards the end of 20%, or from 100% to 80% of the boss, you're going to be, running out of deep wounds off of Ravager and that Warbreaker. So at that point, then you're going to be Mortal Striking just to keep up deep wounds, and then, Condemning until you can't anymore. And then at that point, it's just Mortal Strike on cooldown, keep Overpower procs rolling after that, Skull Splitter anytime you're below 60 rage, and filling with Slam. And that's basically the general, single target rotation. You do want to continue to use Ravager, Warbreaker, and everything on cooldown. I will say that, like, mid-fight, when you can't Condemn, you're going to want to Ravager before you Warbreaker in this situation, when you don't have Avatar up, for example, because if you get a Avatar or a Rec proc from the Ravager, then that's just going to make your Warbreaker do more damage or potentially crit from the Recklessness, so you definitely want to drop the Ravager before it in that case. But other than that, generally speaking, as far as cooldown usage goes, if the boss or any adds are nearing that 35% health threshold window, if they're at 45% or so, and you've got cooldowns up, I would save them and wait for that window, because most of ARM's damage right now is loaded into Condemn phases, so even if you're delaying by 30 seconds or so you can have Avatar, for that window, I would say it's worth it to wait for the 35% at the very end and, you know, burn all your cooldowns during that Condemn phase. Because if you get a Recklessness proc outside of Condemn, you're going to Rage Cap, and it's kind of wasted Rage. You can actually do one minor thing if you want. If you're literally at 100 Rage and you've got a bunch of time left on your Recklessness proc, you can ignore Pain because it's off GCD to proc another Overpower. Just to make your Moral Strike hit that little bit harder. It's a very minor thing, but if you're Rage Capped, you can do that. So anyway, there's a lot of nuance to that. In practice, I'll try to demonstrate this as best I can. I'm going to charge in, do my thing, and I got a Rec proc, so this is where I'm just going to be spamming Condemn, and then you can actually fill in with that last GCD with Skull Splitter if you're at low rage like I was right there, and then I'm going to drop my my Ravager right after that. I got another Rec proc, which is great, so this is just Condemn spam because you're also getting that crit chance off of it, which synergizes really well with our Conduit. As soon as that fell off, I'm going to go ahead and burn that first Overpower charge, and then, you know, it's going to be Skull Splitter to keep up your rage generation, and let's say that the boss was theoretically below 80%, then it's Moral Strike and Slam, and you're just going to spam Slam. As long as you have enough rage to keep up your Moral Strike. You're not going to want to dump down to 0 if your Moral Strike is about to come up, of course. And then it's just fill in like normal, drop your Ravager again before your next Warbreaker, Moral Strike on cooldown. Don't delay your Moral Strike if you have an Overpower proc, unless you literally just dumped all your rage and you have 0. In which case, you would Overpower first if there's nothing else to press. But generally, you want to keep Moral Strike on cooldown whenever you can. Sorry, buddy, I can't answer your question right now. Anyway, so moving on to AoE rotation, and if you're speccing differently, generally on like light cleave fights, this is what I'll run anyway. You could swap out Sudden Death, I suppose, over Skull Splitter. So if you're hitting 2 to 3 targets, I would still say stay Ravager spec'd. And this is where AoE's rotation gets a little bit finicky with arms right now. You're going to want to Condemn literally anytime you possibly can, even without Sweeping Strikes up, but definitely with Sweeping Strikes up. So anytime there's a target that you can hit one or more targets with Sweep up, you're going to want to Condemn. Obviously, you're going to want to keep Deep Wounds up on both targets as much as possible whenever you can, and it's basically going to be the single target rotation, just tab targeting around to hit anything that's within Condemn range. Now, when everything is out of Condemn range and you have Sweeping Strikes up, then you're going to be using Sweeping Strikes and your single target rotation, Mortal Strike, Overpower, etc. When there's even 3 targets, and probably even 4 targets, when it's like that perfect 5 target situation, when you can Whirlwind, since Whirlwind is now capped at 5 targets and nothing is condemnable, then you're going to cast Whirlwind and try to keep up Deep Wounds on at least 2 to 4 targets, because it lasts 12 seconds now, so you can get it up on 4 targets technically with Sweeping Strikes up, and then you're going to want to, you know, burn off Whirlwind and Overpower during that window anyway in AoE, and just rotate cooldowns, you know, appropriately. When you're spec'd into Dreadnought for, like, mass AoE or just consistent AoE for dungeons, that's when you're going to want to obviously have Bladestorm. You'll have 2 charges of Overpower, so in a 5 target situation where you're starting a pull or something, Dreadnought does a ton of damage in AoE, so yes, you want to keep up Deep Wounds on as many things as possible, but say your cooldowns are down, and all you've got is 2 Dreadnought charges and, you know, Mortal Strike and your standard stuff. So I would say that on the pull, when you're going in with Sweeping Strikes up at least, you're going to want to use that first Dreadnought charge anyway, in case it procs on spending Rage, just to help pad out your rotation when you don't have all your cooldowns up. As well as, in that point, you're obviously going to be condemning anytime you possibly can over 2 targets, and then filling out with those overpowers to cleave as much as possible. Another thing with Dreadnought and the way it works, it's a line from the back of your target. So if I'm standing here, right, and I'm hitting Overpower, it's potentially only hitting things in like a shotgun pattern behind this target. So you always want to position yourself to where it's going to be clipping everything in a line through it. And you can also double dip with it, because if you have Sweeping Strikes up, it's going to be proccing on 2 targets. So not only is the line off this guy going to hit this guy, his line is going to hit this guy, which is also getting hit by the original line, so you're like double dipping with your positioning, whereas you could miss some of that potential if you're just standing like front on into a pack. It's kind of a, you know, you'll get the hang of it the more that you do it. But anyway, that's basically the multi-target situation rotation. I guess the opening burst is pretty obvious. Well, kinda. Actually, it's not, because what I would say in a perfect situation where there's 5 targets here, you're gonna charge in, obviously, pop your avatar, and depending on what happens, so I got a Bladestorm proc there. Great. I'm gonna go ahead and Warbreaker out of that, and then I'm gonna Sweeping Strikes and condemn as many things as I possibly can. So you would tab target around during your cooldown window, holding onto your actual Bladestorm here until everything was at 80% while you have Sweeping Strikes up, of course. And then after everything's below that threshold, then you would Bladestorm, and that's gonna help pad out that gap between, you know, 80 to 35% health, as well as the fact that with cooldowns up and Sweeping Strikes, Condemn is going to do just as much damage as Bladestorm on at least 5 targets. If you were in like a mass 8 target situation, then you could just pop everything in Bladestorm, and that would be fine too. But if you really want to maximize it, I would Condemn everything as long as you could, and then Bladestorm. And that's pretty much the burst AoE rotation for that. Moving on to the Conduits here. Like I said, Crash the Ramparts is what I'm going to be using anytime I'm spec'ing a Dreadnought. Otherwise, it's Ashen Juggernaut. And if you can use 2 Conduits, I know if you're Kyrian or whatever, you could have 2 Potency Conduits. If you're spec'ing into Venthyr, you're probably going to take Dauntless Duelist at the end here, so we only get 1 option. However, if you have 2, it's probably going to be Ashen Juggernaut, or you could just say Crash the Ramparts for like pure single target. Mortal Combo is probably a little bit better in pure single target, but in a lot of fights there's going to be add potential, so Crash is just fine. Another notable one is Merciless Bone Grinder here. When Bladestorm ends, Whirlwind's going to do a ton of extra damage. Generally, I don't like this because it's very loaded, so if you have, you know, the perfect Avatar Warbreaker Bladestorm combo, then yeah, you can Whirlwind spam out of that and do a ton of burst, but generally I would like Crash and Dreadnought better for that consistent AoE between those burst windows anyway. Mortal Combo is definitely good for PvP right now because of the RNG nature of it, and the way it synergizes with the other legendary that I would recommend using, which is Unhinged. Bladestorm, when Bladestorm's active, you'll cast 2 Mortal Strikes at random nearby enemies. When you're Bladestorming, you can actually proc that Conduit, so potentially you could get 4 Mortal Strikes if you're lucky, as well as the fact that when this is on, if you actually pop Sweeping Strikes before you Bladestorm, these 2 Mortal Strikes will cleave during that window, so you get 4 for free during your Bladestorm window, which is a lot of burst in PvP, and those ones can proc, so you could get like 6 or whatever out of it for free, so you know, roll the dice if you feel lucky about it. The Mortal Combo Conduit is really good. Or I would say Crash the Ramparts, once again, is just super consistent, good pressure in PvP. That's what I've been playing with for the most part. As long as you're spec'd into Dreadnought, it's really good. And yeah, so that's about all those things I wanted to cover. I think I'm forgetting something here. Oh yes, the legendaries. Other than those 2, Unhinged and Signet are the 2 ones I would definitely recommend. Signet for raiding and PvE, Unhinged for PvP. All these other ones, generally, I would stay away from. You could pick up the Whirlwind one if you wanted to cheese with that Conduit, just doing a ton of Whirlwind damage, but I don't think it's that valuable. These 2 are decent. Judgment, if you're just lazy and don't want to use Signet, then you could use this for raiding, but Signet's going to be way better in the long run. Safuz is actually really good for PvP as well, if you don't like the way the Unhinged plays out, especially if you're an Orc, because this CC reduction will stack with the Orc racial, so you could, you know, have this as an option. None of these other ones are really notable, however, so yeah, that's basically all I wanted to cover. Trinkets are kind of hard to come by in Shadowlands. You probably want this thing, the Overwhelming Power Crystal, if you can get a high item level one of it, and then you could run one of the raid trinkets, but a lot of them are on use, and they, you know, obviously share a 20-second internal CD, so if you could pick up, like, the verse trinkets, or even a PvP trinket that's just going to proc main stat, those are both fine examples as well. And yeah, I think that's all I wanted to cover today. I'm sure I'm forgetting something, but if I do, I'll edit this. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions about all this, feel free to leave them down below. Oh, I know. So, Kyrian and Night Fae, I suppose I should throw in Spear of Bastion and Ancient Aftershock. You're just going to line it up with your cooldowns. It's really that simple. You know, anytime you got cooldowns up in Warbreaker, you're going to use those things. And, you know, go through everything that I just said beforehand. The PvP talents, generally, this is how I would, like, spec into most games, and swapping out Storm of Destruction with Disarm, or Banner, or Overwatch even, depending on what I'm fighting. But Sharpen and Master and Commander are just too good right now. Sharpen's basically a given, and Master and Commander is super good because it stacks with the Inspiring Presence Conduit, so right now it's giving 45% temporary health on a minute cooldown, so it's really good. Would recommend that one. But anyway, I won't talk your ear off any longer. Thanks for watching. I will see you next time. Peace.